Hi, Aaron. Great to have you on our channel. And could you start a little bit with your bio? Of particular interest is when you told me that you've implemented about 100 agents already, which I thought was pretty impressive.
Great to be here, Andrew. I've had a large interest in AI and ML since I was an undergrad. All the classes I was able to take on it, I did. I spent 5 years running engineering at an education startup. In the better part of the last year or so, we spent building our own internal tools for AI product development. And eventually we realized there's a market that specializes in this. We just have to pay them, and they will give us better and better tools as time goes on. We don't have to do it in-house. And then eventually I ended up joining one of those companies, which I was a customer of, which is called Vellum. And now I've spent the better part of the last year advising other companies on how to build AI agents and workflows successfully. We've worked across a ton of different industries. We have customers that are in the legal space with a really high bar for accuracy, and same thing with healthcare, and same thing with real estate. We've done some projects in commercial real estate and commercial insurance. And what else? Education. We've really worked pretty across the board on all of this. And I've seen a variety of different agent use cases. A lot of them are oriented around data retrieval. And a lot of the places I've seen agents be most successful in production is when they're assisting a human rather than fully acting on their behalf. And so things like, again, gathering data for them, it really automates a lot of the effort for them. So one cool one I was working on with a team was one that would use their knowledge bases, and they could feed in any document they wanted. Better yet, they were able to just query their documents and not even have to go look for them. So no need to go find it and drag and drop it. You just ask for the project you're working on, and then they would be able to have a back and forth conversation with the agent until they got all the tickets that they wanted to be created for a project they're working on. And then they would just ask it to simply push all of those to, I think it was Jira, maybe Shortcut. So that one is a really interesting one that saved them a lot of time. Again, like the bar on that one was the bar for accuracy was low because it was not doing all of the work on their behalf. It was more of a partner. And so I thought that was a very interesting use case. There's another one that we have partnered with a company called Redfin to build their chat agent. They have another high bar for quality on theirs. They have very strict nuances in language that are used when people are looking for properties to buy. So adhering to Adhering to the Fair Housing Act, I believe, and regulations there's just very, very nuanced language. And if they get any one of those cases wrong, it could be a big issue. Wow. So they've worked with Vellum to build their chat agents for that and prevent any issues. It's very easy to introduce regressions and not realize it unless you're doing test-driven development. Especially when you switch models to like the latest and greatest, it might be better in most cases that are obvious, but there might be really bespoke edge cases that they don't realize. So that was another interesting one we've worked on that helps people figure out where they want to get their properties. I believe was their use case.
Cool. Those sound like pretty useful use cases. Now, in those cases, have you experimented with contrasting the paid solutions like OpenAI or Gemini or Anthropic with open source models that you can host locally, like Llama?
Yeah. So most teams will still opt to host their models in the cloud somewhere rather than local. I mean, yeah, I guess locally, of course, that's what we mean.
Mhm.
So yeah, there are real benefits to using the open source ones because any company can build infrastructure to support them. And so you have things like Cerebras out there that has like incredibly fast inference rates. And then of course, like lots of orgs, especially the larger ones, they have more control when they use those models. So they could always opt out of using Cerebras and host it in their own clouds. And so there's less vendor lock in there. They're more in control. A lot of them aren't doing very fancy things that I've seen with like distilling or fine tuning necessarily because these models, the open source models, are so cheap to run. And so they get a lot of bang for their buck just right out the gate setting it up. And of course, security, I mean, they're fully in control of their own security and compliance. They know exactly where all of their data is going. And so that's another huge benefit for them.
Right. Just really quickly, because some people might have different definitions for agents. Would you like to define what an agent is in your mind?
Yes, I would love to. So, we recently wrote a blog post on this, and we took a lot of inspiration from the autonomous vehicle industry about it. Uh, a lot of people would agree that a car that has cruise control is not self driving, but that is a necessity for a car that is fully autonomous. And so that industry has, I believe, 5 or 6 levels of autonomous vehicle. And the challenge there is that you want to make sure that every level is working very reliably because you really don't want to just jump straight to fully autonomous. I mean, the public won't trust it. The errors can compound at each stage. And so we've taken that concept and applied it to agents. And I think if you've seen the old school days, like when old school 2 years ago, when ChatGPT came out, a lot of people would have considered the original ChatGPT to be an agent. You sit down, you chat with it, it's able to answer questions, you feed it tons of context, and it can summarize things for you. But now the bar has gotten a little higher, and people think agents are something that has to be able to operate independently and call tools. Some of them think that it needs to be able to reflect after it uses a tool. Other people think it just needs to be able to do things on their behalf. So it's really all over the place. And we've defined it as 5 or 6 different levels. And the most basic ones are more like workflows where it's more deterministic. You're still using LLMs, so it's non deterministic, very probability oriented. It might say a different thing each time you use it, but you generally know the control flow of how it's going to run. As you move up the ladder, once it starts using tools and then reflecting on the outcomes of the tool use, you're giving up a lot more control, just like the autonomous vehicles. And you're trusting the models and your architecture to make a lot more decisions on your behalf before coming back to you for input. So we define it as a spectrum, as the short answer.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer, actually. I'll put the link in the description notes for this talk then. What are your views on when it's premature to actually try to use an agent rather than just a regular workflow?
I actually find agents pretty good for making a proof of concept of something, and workflows could even be an optimization of that.
Hmm.
So I would say that because in general, agents are something that you're giving more authority away to, you're giving more control to agents. There's less predictability in how they'll run in production. And that can be really risky for a business. I mean, we saw a couple of years ago a car dealership sell a car for $1. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of edge cases are just so hard to predict because it's hard to make guardrails for all the cases that could be that a user could ask in this
Mhm.
agent. So using it to prove out a concept and just quickly see if it's capable of like roughly doing what you want could be great. If you want to optimize for cost, then workflows are often the better move because there's more predictability in how many times it'll run, how much context it can end up getting. So those are way better at scale. If you're a large enterprise, that's especially applicable to you as opposed to a small startup that probably has a few users. You just want to build something that they like. So workflows, generally, I see those being more reliable for enterprises operating at scale with a much higher consequence of error as well. And so yeah, workflows are just more predictable for most use cases as opposed to agents and easier to control.
Yeah, there was a situation where we did an implementation and we had no idea how high the costs would be with.
Oh, you're kidding. Tell me
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. There was some ideas that I had on automated code review, and man, I thought, oh, LLMs would be great for this, but it ended up being so expensive that I was like, all right, forget it, forget my idea. We're just doing something super simple, that has no AI involved with it. So yeah, I'm finding that the cost is a really significant thing that you have to figure out, and sometimes you don't know until you actually start trying to prototype it.
That's a great point that you made on the code review use case. I've seen, and tying that back to consequence of error, a lot of teams that get the most success out of building strictly agent oriented applications, they're not applying them to things that are mission critical for their business. They're nice to have things that wouldn't have gotten done otherwise. I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
Devin, if this AI, the first AI software engineer, got so much hype when it first came out because people were expecting it to be an actual software engineer on your team. And then they relaunched recently And now it actually can run in the background like a software engineer on your team, but
Huh.
it's not doing the things that are mission critical for your product development. It's doing those like Sev3 tickets, those P3 tickets that wouldn't have gotten done otherwise. And so the cost of it messing it up is low, and it's not blocking work that a human would otherwise have gotten done faster if it is mission critical. So it's kind of just running in the background. If it does a good job on one of the tickets, then congrats, you got a free P3 ticket knocked out that wouldn't have been otherwise.
That's really interesting. So, in that final analysis, then, how much benefit is it really bringing given the costs?
I honestly, I don't know. I haven't talked too much to any teams that are actually using Devin in practice. It feels like every 6 or 12 months, I'll read a few articles when they have their next launch, and it gets like very blown up in the press. I'm excited to try it out when I have a chance to, because I think the current iteration of it sounds a lot more practical for where agents are really at in the market.
Hmm.
And I think by the end of this year, we're really going to see a lot more like trust in agents. I mean, Claude just announced Claude Code, which is almost like a competitor to Cursor, and so again, it's more like AI assisted rather than just like giving control over to it and asking it to fully do things for you. But I mean, a lot of engineers are asking Cursor to do their coding for them, and depending on how you leverage that, it could end up really hurting you in the end, and you're not learning.
Yeah, yeah, that's going to lead to some horrible failure stories. Yeah, yeah. I did a talk a little while ago where I talked about the weaknesses, 5 weaknesses of all this Gen AI, and I think one of them is really that it you can't just copy paste. Like all the Gen AI solutions I've seen, that it requires a lot of human validation, and so that's the biggest hurdle, I think. So I did this talk in January, and I kind of talked about these 5 limitations of Gen AI. It's got limited context windows. It has lack of real world understanding. It's good for specialized tasks that are kind of narrow in focus. It's really bad at really taking over a human's entire job in most situations. Um, and it's can fail if there's a lot of decision complexity. And the biggest one is that there's a big dependency on human validation and iteration. And I'm talking about using Gen AI from like the prompt. Okay. Now, when we think about agents, which are actually leveraging the same models underneath, I've been kind of viewing it as really a great, ingenious stopgap that really almost allows you to get more out of Gen AI today than given these weaknesses. That although these weaknesses are still true, that because you can write a Gen AI agent to do a very specific narrow thing, and then you can write another agent to do another specific narrow thing, and so forth, and then you can write some code or even another agent to orchestrate all that. That it's kind of a way of squeezing more juice out of the current Gen AI orange. But what's your view on that take?
I think there's two things that I'm thinking about. One is inference time compute and the revolution that's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
So we have agents that are able to think aloud after each step that they perform on your behalf and decide what to do next. And so they're not just like using type 1 thinking where they just kind of impulsively decide and give you no transparency. They are fully thinking out loud like a human would and letting you see how they're making their decisions. And so that gets even more like collaborative leverage out of it, because then you can steer it better where if you're able to review where it's going wrong. And so that's something that was kind of missing before reasoning models were coming out. People hacked their way around it with chain of thought prompting. But the thing that was really missing was just that a lot of these agents would go off the rails, and we have such high expectations because they're so capable with so little effort. So the first thought that I had is just on reasoning models and inference time compute. The second thought that I have is about that collaborative aspect I mentioned a second ago.
Mhm.
They're high leverage and we're getting a lot of juice out of the squeeze on them, but they're only as good as we are at giving them context and making our goals explicitly clear. And so every engineer and PM in the world knows what I'm talking about when I mention that. People have made the joke that there will always be engineers because people don't know what they want. Engineers and PMs because people don't know what they want, and so they need us to like help them figure out exactly what they really want. And models are bad because they're trained to please us. And so as soon as they think they know what we want, they'll spend 10 minutes going to research something or going to develop an app, an entire app for you without actually knowing what you wanted. So my point is just that these models are only as good as our ability to make it clear what we want and how we're going to evaluate them.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, well said. I want to tell you about this guy. I actually published an interview with this civil engineer, and he has his own little company, and he employed 2.5 software engineers in the past. But then when ChatGPT came out, he was very resourceful and smart in realizing that he could displace all his engineers. So he basically just used ChatGPT to write all the code that he needed to do his work. And in his story, I think he said that he bid out some work for a client that was typically going to be his whole team, 2.5 to 3 months. It ended up taking like 3 days or something. He did it all by himself,
Awesome.
and he was able to still, it was already paid for, so he pocketed all those savings. And he said, I tell everybody, do not go into computer science because there's not going to be any jobs there. I can't see why I would ever hire a software engineer again. And my take on it is that uh, I think that for modern software products that are kind of large and complex, that doesn't work. But for simpler tasks, absolutely. And I think that this is going to really open the door for a lot of people that want to start a business, and they really can get by a lot if they're resourceful, doing a lot of code themselves. I think that this is really going to open the door for product people that know how to do the product side of things to tinker around and actually produce some software, not like really, really cool, complex stuff, but there's opportunities there where they could be a one person army. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's classic Jevons paradox. As the supply of a good increases, the demand unexpectedly also increases. The more people are entering the software world. So people that don't know how to code or previously didn't know how to code are now building software products.
Mhm.
And inevitably, they're either A, going to hit a point where they can't maintain their application with AI anymore because it's just gotten too large and complex, or B, they're going to get tired of spending all their time prompting it and back and forth with an AI to build what they want. They're going to want to start focusing more on prompting to do all their marketing work or whatever else they're going to need to do to run their business.
Hmm.
And so it's interesting because that would probably drive up demand for engineers who do enjoy working with AI to build more products and build software. So I'm very hopeful that it will create more demand for software engineers, and this is still as good of a time as ever to learn it. But it definitely is getting more competitive for the entry level now because AI is so capable of doing some of that beginner work. So I'm just hoping we build cooler software as we get more capable.
So this is analysis that my team has done. We've actually analyzed 420 companies here, 17 billion lines of code, 820,000 software FTEs. And what we've actually seen is, as of the end of last year, only a small fraction, I think, have really adopted Gen AI in their coding. And you can really tell because all of the companies who are kind of like creating this stuff, like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta, we can see actually in the data that there are big productivity gains across a lot of their teams, sometimes most of their teams. And this chart here is actually showing in yellow how a bunch of Microsoft teams have like shot up in productivity because of Gen AI, and then at the same time you see like a reduction in headcount. And that's what I'm showing here is like uh, adding up Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta. We're seeing the headcount has decreased, but their profits have actually increased over that time period based off of just their public reports. And this is something where I'm running into software leaders, and some of them, when they're doing well, they say, "Oh, we got to hire a bunch more engineers." And it's like, no, you don't. Because you haven't really aggressively adopted AI. That's what you got to do. And I think that there's a lot of leaders out there that still don't understand that.
I think there's just so many ways that you can adopt AI in your org that it becomes either overwhelming or confusing to know how to do it best. And engineers also just hate having solutions thrown at them as another thing, at least from my experience. And so if you've ever been on a team that is deciding to switch to some new project management software because it'll make everyone more efficient, it's like,
Yeah.
I'll roll my eyes. And so the same thing here with just having an org force you to start using some new tool.
Yeah.
But I think fortunately, like we're far enough along and there's been enough positive sentiment around tools like Cursor that I'm hoping most orgs are excited when they finally get Cursor approved.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I couldn't be more in agreement with you on that. You got to just enable the rest of your team to be more productive before you start thinking about increasing or decreasing headcount.
Right.
Another thing, actually, to add one more thing to that, you might know better than I do about how AI has helped how teams communicate, because that's a huge challenge, especially for larger enterprises, is like the chain of command to get info from the top down 2 or 3 levels and then across a couple different teams is wild. And I mean, people will wait days for an email back from another department in another state that they're blocked by, when now they could just query ChatGPT to go fetch the relevant documents and recap it for them and estimate a timeline even.
I think that in my own organization, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of efficiency. And one huge thing to efficiency or business agility is rapid decision making. It's like it is just hand in hand. You want to have business agility. You have to speed up the decision making in your organization. And so, any business book would tell you, yeah, to do that, you got to decentralize decision making. But then how? How?
Mm,
You have to democratize information. And you have to make access possible for the masses. And then if you use Gen AI to be able to make it much easier to absorb quickly, oh, that's a no-brainer. So absolutely. I mean, we're making lots of use of Gen AI in our just daily activities. But yeah, when ChatGPT GPT 3.5 came out, and I tried it like, I don't know, like 3 months after it came out, I was just like, oh my gosh. And I had a meeting immediately with my staff telling them that everyone needs to adopt this. And I encourage people, use it all day, every day. Like even in your personal life. And I gave examples of how I use it in my personal life, because you start learning more and more and more that you can use it for just about anything, and we are so limited in our human minds as to what could I use this for, and I still keep surprising myself when I'm like, I'm going to see if this works. Of course it worked. Wow.
yeah, it's really accurate that they called it a discovery, not an invention, because we're still figuring out new ways to use it every day. We don't even know what it's capable of fully, which is kind of scary. These large companies are probably not investing nearly enough in AI safety. The government is not regulating and mandating that nearly enough either.
Yeah.
But there's even less in private industry. So, like, let alone building these models that are so capable, but private industry has like no regulations. I mean, just the standard regulations they currently have, they're going to hold those for their AIs. But I mean, uh, we're not holding a higher bar for the AIs than we are for humans, and people are trusting AIs because they're computers, like they should be reliable. So
Hmm.
anyway,
Yeah, which gets back to a huge weakness of Gen AI, which is that it has a lot of dependence on human validation and iteration. If you don't
Mhm.
do that, here's what I said is like, here's the keyboard behind all the horror stories, right? It's just copy paste, and we're going to see that crisis, I think, on the AI safety. I had a talk about this with somebody, and they were like, "What do you think about this AI safety and the concerns that you brought up? That like there's not really that much focus. It's all about progress, progress, progress." And I said, "Yeah, we're headed for horror stories." It's like it's going to happen. It's just when, right? And then you know what's going to happen? Then everyone's going to talk about it, and then you start putting the brakes on, and then you figure out some middle ground. But for right now, I think that there's so much fear of certain nations or industries obsoleting obsoleting you because the promise of Gen AI is so huge. So it's like everyone's pedal to the metal.
I think the other challenge is that these models came out before the tools to use them. And so before the tools or the resources to use them either. And so models came out super capable, but the whole world is uneducated about how to use them effectively. And so we're figuring that out in real time. And we're also figuring out what tools to build in real time. So now we have the luxury of being a few years in, and there are orgs that like Vellum that work across so many industries and can take learnings from one and apply them to another. And there are tools like Vellum and all of our competitors out there that make it easier to test and evaluate your AI. It doesn't need to be something that every company is building from scratch or even skipping over in the first place, because it's just too much work to do anyway. So,
Right.
yeah. So I'm grateful that we're entering an era with all the right tools and more education about it.
I want to talk with you about some speculation I have for the future.
Mhm.
Um, I have been coming across a lot of young people that are not sure what they want to major in college. Maybe they college freshmen, and so they're asking me my advice, and I'm like, well, a lot of the best jobs probably don't even exist yet because when you're a junior, you'll be like, oh my gosh, this job is hot and that job is hot, and it doesn't exist today. But out of the jobs that do exist today, I think product management and sales. And here's the reason why. In this graph, I'm showing that these companies that are like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, aggressively adopting AI, they're able to get more work done per person. So they're reducing headcount and they're continuing to lay off people. But then what's going to happen? You have all this excess coder capacity, right? And it's going to get bigger when the rest of the companies that aren't as leading edge start realizing that they can do the same things. They need like a fraction of the staff that they have today to get the software work done. And so you're going to have all this excess technical bandwidth, which will then make it cheaper to hire the technical people. And then because you can do so much more with a single person, you're going to have tons of micro startups. And what are you going to be lacking in? You're going to need really good product people. You're going to need sales talent. If you have product and sales talent in the same person, oh, now you're set. And you need like one engineer, and you can have like a pretty amazing product. And so I really see the landscape changing into having tons of micro companies. What's your thoughts on that theory?
Yeah. So I have thoughts on the micro companies vision that you're painting, and I think I agree in general. And then I also have thoughts on the sentiment of like what should I study or what career path should I go into, what jobs will exist in 5 to 10 years. This is near and dear to me because I spent 5 years working in ed tech with a lot of high school and college students that were all worried about the same thing,
Yeah.
and 10 years before that as a tutor. And so I've spent a lot of my adulthood and childhood working closely with students in education. And my take is that because there's so much uncertainty about what kinds of jobs will exist in the future, and because so many micro companies will exist, it's almost more important to show that you have good taste than skills anywhere in any particular area.
Mm.
You know, That's maybe a hot take. I'm not saying you shouldn't have skills, but I'm saying in a hyper competitive world like software engineering, I know from my own experience that the people who got the most prestigious internships were the ones who had side projects, were the ones who had side projects that looked great also. And so to do that, I mean, that's effectively just a way of showing that you have taste and that you can code. And
Hmm.
so you're showing your skill and your taste at the same time. But when the skills are so diluted because everyone has access to the same resources, and the resources, like, it becomes negligible how well you know how to prompt in the future, then really what stands out is how much taste you have and how well you communicate with other people if you want to go down the sales route. And so taste in personality, or taste in product, your eye for product and design. And so I think that that is probably one of the best things you could develop and prove if you want to just be defensible in any industry, in any jobs that might exist in the future.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I have very similar views there, and this is a slide that I used in a talk in January. I was talking with, it was a talk given in Agile Alliance, and so there were, you know, these five different um, careers involved there. And what I'm showing here is I was like, all right, here's mind maps of the tasks that you do as a software developer or a designer or a scrum master or a product owner or a product manager. And are things where AI today, Gen AI today, is highly, highly displacing that, or you could say highly accelerating it. And then the yellow are the ones where those tasks are moderately accelerated or moderately displaced, however you want to say it. And green is where it's pretty much still like in the humans camp. But the big point I was making to this is that if people don't broaden what they do,
Hmm.
your value is going down. So that's the negative side of it. The glass half full side of it, which I prefer, is this allows people to get into additional functions much, much more easily. So, like what you said, designer, if you're a developer, but now why don't you aspire to pick up design skills? Oh, it's easier than ever. And that would be true with anybody else. I think that when you were talking about that the coders that are showing that they have taste, or I was interpreting that as design sense,
Yes.
kind of
Oh,
like
yeah, absolutely.
a talent, some talent of a designer. And that made me think about this message that I'm giving to people, that most professions in the world, if you want to be a contributor in that profession, the barrier to entry has lowered because of Gen AI.
Mhm.
And that's true almost across the board for anything in our industry. And so, if you're a software developer, you want to pick up the design, it's easier than ever. You're a product manager and you want to pick up design or write code, it's easier than ever, and so forth, right? Wherever you're starting, your barrier of entry to pick on additional skills is much easier. And so, one of the big beliefs I have, and I've definitely pushed this on my own staff, is to not think of themselves as their historical job description, that it is easier than ever to be a cross-functional individual. And I think the whole thing about cross-functional teams, we've been talking about that a long time. Cross-functional individuals is another level to get agility. That's a level above it.
Yeah, and to add something to that, I've seen a lot of orgs that are reluctant or delaying their plans to adopt AI into their products,
Mm-hmm.
not because they lack ideas or conviction about them, but
Mm-hmm.
because they don't think they have the talent for it. And to your point, it's never been easier to learn those skills to start building these things. And there's never been more resources and best practices out there to
Yeah.
do it. And so my advice again to like those orgs that are considering adopting Gen AI into their products is to really believe in the potential of your people with the right tools, that they can learn this stuff pretty quickly and build things that are very reliable and add a lot of value to your orgs.
Right. Yeah. I was talking with one of my staff yesterday, and I told them, I said, I'm pretty sure that you and I have gotten to a place where we're using Gen AI more and more deeply than 99% of the human population out there right now. And he was like, "Really?" I was like, "Oh yeah." And then I said to him, and think about it from this perspective. What's your job description? What are you? And he couldn't answer that. And I said, of course you can't answer that because you do some of this and some of this and some of this and some of this and some of this. You know, like this is the new world. Anybody, anybody, and a lot of people are going to migrate this direction, and it's going to be really, really hard to have these siloed job descriptions anymore. And I think that the fact that these siloed job descriptions remain today are a huge mental impediment to helping people evolve to what they can evolve to.
There's one risk, like another risk with betting on your AI strategy that I've been thinking about. I've seen a few cases with some of the workflows and agents that some of our customers have built where something that started out really complex has ended up becoming like a single step in their system.
Mm.
Like two different cases that come to mind. One is this deep research that originally was like a set of many different tools is now just like a call to a single model that has deep research ability. And another one is like structured data extraction from PDFs, where originally you would pull in an entire document, you'd do some OCR to extract all the text from it, you'd run it through several different prompts, looking for different things and evaluating each other. And now there are just products out there that specialize in it. I'm a huge fan of Reducto. They're one of them. And then Gemini from Google is apparently like the new industry standard for that kind of task. And so when you're betting your business around features that have this kind of stuff, and then the model providers go out and just suck it all up or make it easier, um, that's risky because you bet your product strategy on it. But I'll caveat that it's not as risky as people think, because if you have the right tools, you are getting the best out of it every time a company leapfrogs each other on that capability. So
Mm.
I'll switch from one product right to the next as soon as that one's better.
Hmm.
And I can run all my tests and make sure that I'm not going to have regressions. And now I'm doing everything for a hundredth of the cost and twice the accuracy just overnight. And I already have distribution because people are using my product because I had those features first.
Cool. Uh, Aaron, I want to ask your opinion on contrasting the major Gen AI solutions out there. I
Mm.
have this table here with OpenAI and Claude and Gemini, and you'll see that there's specs for the context window, and then I translated that to number of words just to make it more easy to understand. And then on the last column, there's task complexity. And this is just from looking at things from the technical perspective of creating these, t-shirt sizes for the task complexity. Now, in your experiences, have you seen any really huge differences in the utility of, let's say, Gemini, because it has a context window that's like 10 times bigger than everybody else, or Claude 3 Opus that supposedly has an ability to be able to handle much more complex tasks than, let's say, OpenAI?
Oh yeah, it's a fully night and day difference. I could give you one example is that most people I know who use Cursor for their software engineering assistance, they use Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Well, now Claude 3.7 Sonnet. And it's like several models have come out since 3.5 Sonnet that are supposedly better. Uh, GPT GPT 01, I think maybe some iteration of 4.0, maybe different Gemini models. And it's because all of these model providers are training and showing off their stats on these benchmarks, but
Yeah.
not, again, taste kind of at the end of the day in like practical real world use cases. Um, it's like really night and day. Like I've found a lot more success using a weaker non-reasoning model through Claude 3.5 Sonnet for coding than I have through using a more powerful reasoning model. And so that's one very bespoke instance where it really like this chart is really accurate for the kinds of things you could use it for. But that said, I mean, the context window enables use cases that just aren't possible with other ones, or you'd have to do a ton of extra work to make it possible. So, for example, if you have a giant contract and you want to go find a needle in a haystack, some clause in it, and it's hundreds of pages long, these smaller context window models aren't going to get the job done. And even if you do all this extra work to chunk it up and look across it in partitions, it's still, I mean, that's a lot of extra work and it may or may not work. And sometimes having all of it in the same context window is pretty critical for it doing the job well. So, they're just totally used for different use cases and they really excel at different things.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've run into the context window limitation in OpenAI like so many times. It's so frustrating.
And
And
another thing that I've seen folks comment on a lot is that they find cheaper or even more expensive models, but they end up preferring just the general language that one of them uses. So I've seen a lot of people a big fan of Claude's copywriting compared to GPT's series models that sound more robotic.
hmm,
And so, and yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you think about the strategy of these model providers too, because if their goal is to build AGI, then they're not going to optimize for great copywriting. But at the same time, I mean, that's part of their trajectory to get there too. Is people need to be able to use them. So
yeah.
yeah,
Uh, I know we met each other because we were both speaking at Product World, but another one of the Product World speakers, Michael Mace, he told me that they did um, comparisons of all these models, and people rated Claude the best because it was the most friendly and didn't talk down to
I've read different sentiments on the internet. Like I saw a viral post that literally said, "I figured out how to get Claude to stop being sassy with me."
Oh, that's funny.
And I mean, seriously, there's like actually a lot of examples out there where Claude
Uh,
was just being very short with people.
yeah.
So I mean, I guess it just depends. And on that note, like that actually is an AI safety thing too. OpenAI released an entire paper about the kinds of biases that they're still trying to mitigate.
Mm.
And so they found that if you have like a female sounding name versus a male sounding name, and you ask it for the definition of some acronym, it might give you something totally different than any male sounding person who is asking for the acronym. And it gives you like a more business oriented acronym if you're a man, and like um, if you're not, it'll give you something else. And it's really terrible the kinds of different experiences people will end up having with AI because of that. So yeah,
That's interesting. That's really interesting. All right. So this is something that I've communicated to my staff for well over a year, and I shared this for the first time publicly in January. The way that I view Gen AI and have pitched it to my team is that it's the first time in history that you can actually amplify your own human talent. And I came up with these terms of horizontal amplification and vertical amplification. I think that I definitely feel like that every one of us is much more productive than we ever were before. But I think that the other part that isn't talked about as much is the vertical amplification. And the example that I kind of give to help people understand this is I'm a guitar player, so I'm a musician at night, and but I'm not a songwriter yet, and that's kind of been on my bucket list for a couple of years of like someday I need to learn the skills to write my own songs. But then I got the idea of like, wait a second, there's Gen AI, and so I came up with the theme of the song, and then I said I want this song in the style of this artist, and I'm playing guitar, right? And so I iterated to get the words and the chords, and so what was I doing? I was validating for it. I want you to change this or change that or have it sound more happy or whatever, and I had enough human talent to validate the responses it was giving me, but I don't have a songwriting talent, right? But I didn't need to. I didn't need to be the expert to be able to produce the result of someone much greater than my current level of expertise. And I think that that is something that is really, really important, that we have to have enough competence to be able to validate the results, but that doesn't mean that you actually have to be the expert. Have you thought about this?
yeah. I mean, it all comes back to taste, right? And it's like you can have some of the skills or all of the skills, but at the end of the day, having taste is the biggest amplifier there is. Also, I have a feeling this is part of why we're friends, because that's been one of my favorite use cases. Like literally the exact thing you just described. I am a very mediocre guitar player, sort of in that like mid-range, like plateau level, and I've gotten so much leverage out of using ChatGPT to coach me through to the next level. And I've
Mhm.
had a lot of fun because I always get writer's block trying to write songs,
Mhm.
and so I have concepts and I have concepts of great songs, and it drafts them for me, and I can tell exactly what's good and what's not good, and I'm proud of the end result. It's been great. So yeah, I mean, my thoughts here is just that you could apply this to any industry. This is exactly what we were talking about with software engineering, where everyone can be a novice programmer, but if you want to jump to expert pretty quickly, you have the tools right at your disposal that will coach you so detailed to get there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a great tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is another thing I want to talk with you about.
Mhm.
Um, this is a slide that I created for my staff like 3 months after GPT 3.5 came out because I was just so amazed by it. And I said, all right, this is a game changer. And so I had a meeting and I told my developers, I said, we need to start adopting, I need all of you to start aggressively adopting AI. And I'm not sure that we ever need to put up job postings for software developers anymore. And they were surprised to hear me say that. They were like, what? Because we're a software development company. And I said, and I'm not sure I have jobs for software developers a year from now. And then I saw like fear on faces, right? Now I had their attention. And I said, what I think I do have jobs for are software composers. And here's what I mean by software composer. And I put up this slide. I said, they don't spend a lot of their effort on implementation or unit testing and less effort on integration and system testing. They spend a lot more effort on design. They also are more involved in understanding requirements and the planning so that they can interact with the product people more and the designers more. And so the effort I was showing them needs to shift because they can use Gen AI to really accelerate or displace a lot of the tasks that are in red and yellow. But then that opens up opportunity to invest that time and human energy in other things. And I came up with this thing, Software Composer, is because right before then I did my very first studio work as a guitar player. And it was so eye-opening because the artist that I was serving there um, was obviously there, and the producer of the music was there, and it was the producer that was really kind of giving all the ideas. I could tell the producer had something in mind after the artist did his song. And he was like, oh, how about if you change this? Or how about this beat? Andrew, how about if you play something kind of like this? And I realized at the end, the artist was happy with the result. And I thought, like, wow, that was awesome. But it was really, the thought was in the mind of the producer, which I'm calling composer. And I was like, that's the analogy that I need. Use AI to write all these methods, but you need to create the larger level architecture. You need to create I want you to create the class ecosystems and do that well. And then use AI to fill in all the methods and all that kind of stuff and, use it to accelerate unit tests. What are your thoughts about this analogy? Is this accurate to what you've been doing?
It makes it sound almost like you're not using AI for that high level planning part, which is arguably where I find it the most useful also.
Ah, tell me about
Because that's where a lot of teams will shoot themselves in the foot, where you start building out this architecture that your team is committed to, and there's some difficult to change gap. I mean, obviously, if you've designed your system well, it should be pretty easy to plug and play and mutate different parts of it. But mistakes happen, right? And so the fact that you can have an AI to bounce ideas off of at that stage is like pretty critical. It can help you with that bird's eye view and drafts and like totally different considerations and pitching new ideas. And so I've found it really helpful for that step of it. And it's almost like, to your analogy, if the vision wasn't coming from an AI, but if you were brainstorming with it before you even got in the studio, and it helps give you more clarity on some different ideas you could have before you even get there.
Yeah.
But of course, you need a trial and error in that case. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I actually totally agree with everything you said there, and um, I didn't touch on that part, but that's the vertical amplification.
Mm,
That's
mhm.
where I think is particularly makes sense or impactful for the younger, less experienced engineers that I have, where I'm like, take a look at this. Hey, ChatGPT, I want to create a competitive application to Uber. Give me a good software architecture. And then the things that it comes out with, they might not understand it, but I'm like, that's actually pretty reasonable. That's pretty damn impressive. And so absolutely, but they'd have to, again, you have to have enough knowledge to be able to validate, right? Because if they're too junior, they wouldn't be able to validate, is this really true? Because we've done a lot of big data stuff, and I could immediately look at it and be like, yeah, that's really reasonable. And but
That's where having the skill of asking good questions is more important now than ever.
Yeah, and
Like,
also asking, how did you come up with this?
yeah, yeah,
Give me your
exactly.
reasoning process.
I mean, I'm seeing viral stories about students in college that are actually complaining that ChatGPT has made them dumber because they just have it write papers for them, and then they try turning it in, and they do great because it can't get detected. And it's terrible. It's really terrible because they're not learning how to write better. They're not developing taste.
Mhm.
And it's, I mean, I'm a huge fan of AI assisted writing if you're actually learning from the prose that it's helping you draft, and you're figuring out what flavor you want faster. Because I mean, think about it. If you want to change the whole structure of your paper, back in the day, you would have to do that by manually rewriting sections and moving it around
Yeah,
and making a second draft. Now you can just explain your vision and then read it and see if you like it more or not. So
exactly.
asking questions and trying things is so important before you just hand off your Uber architecture without understanding it.
Yeah. You know, um, I have told so many people, both at a professional level and on a personal level, when they are like, "Oh, what can I invest in? What kind of certification can I get to better my?" I was like, "No, no, 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 no. Don't think about that. Have you taken a prompt engineering course? No. Well, that's job number one." and when GPT-4 came out, one of my engineers told me like, "Oh yeah, Andrew, all that prompt engineering thing that you're saying that people need to do, it's not going to be needed anymore because it's all baked in." And I was like, "No, no, 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 no. It's very, very, very needed." And
For now,
it's
I mean, it might not be. I am definitely seeing it be less and less needed. Like you in the past, you actually, if you asked Claude to do something for you, like make me a report on X
Mhm.
company, it would say, sure, here's your report on X company. But if you're using this in a product, you don't want it to say, sure, here's your report on X company when you hand it off to a user. You want it to just give you the report. And you had to say no preamble, postamble is like the highest likelihood of getting it to not ramble at the beginning or the end of it. But
Hmm.
now you could say, like, just give me the report, and it actually is much better at doing that. So I would maybe disagree with you there that I think we're heading in a direction where prompt engineering, strictly speaking, is becoming less of a necessary skill with smarter and cheaper models. But but to your point though, like knowing how there is still an art to knowing how to have long conversations with AI. I mean, if you get deep into coding something and there's a bug, these AIs can still kind of get stuck in a hole where they don't know how to fix it. And if you just start a brand new conversation with it, then it's not getting confused anymore.
Mhm.
So I think the best thing is for people to just be curious and inquisitive and
Mhm.
just explore different use cases and projects rather than a course. But a lot of people, of course, do much better with structure. I just think
Yeah.
that the structure for this kind of thing is just evolving so quickly. So, you know,
Okay. Well, all right. Now, the things that you said, I don't disagree with actually.
yeah.
That it's actually gotten better. Absolutely. I mean, there's a big difference between 4.0 and 3.5. But I would still say that some of my top advice to people is go take a prompt engineering course. So, would you agree with that?
I don't know what's in the prompt engineering courses, to be honest. I think that you could probably do like a 2 hour online blog post with like a bunch of top tips and get 80% of the results instead of doing an entire course on it. Actually, a couple of years ago, a year or two ago, I did a course just to see what the latest was out there on it, and I found it like slow to learn the things that it was trying to teach me. And, I'm biased because I already knew some of it, but it
Yeah.
was like very code oriented, at least the one that I did. And so,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know. Do you have any recommendations? Like, what have you seen in these courses?
Yeah, I've recommended the Google course, but I haven't looked into a lot of other variety, and so I'll bet you that there's a lot of good courses out there. But here's one of the reasons why I do that is because I've come across multiple people, even like scientists, right, PhD scientists, where they're like, "Oh no, no, GPT sucks," and like I tried it. I'm like, "No, no, that's not true." I say, "All right, give me some background. What are you doing your research on?" And then I say, "All right, I'm going to do it in front of your face." All right, and then I'll write a prompt and send it out, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's pretty good." It's a yeah, yeah. So interpret this for me because I don't understand your domain. Okay, now I'm going to ask this, and they're like, "Oh wow!" And you know what it is that they have no context. There's so many people that have no context of even what a crappy prompt is. Right? They're like have 6 words in it. You're going to get crappy results if you have 6 word prompts. You and I'll bet you if somebody just looked at our prompts, they're like, okay, you and I are like averaging like between 18 and 26 words or whatever per prompt, because we know what we need to say and how we need to say it. We also know that we should tell it how to approach it. If we know how to approach it, do this first, then do this, then do this, rather than, oh, I can assume that it'll figure that out, because it's just not good at that. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about that I don't feel like the masses really even understand those limitations.
Well, so this is where reasoning models are getting really interesting because they might not get it right. The way that you want a model to think about a certain problem, it might take you 2 or 3 steps and it takes it 7 or 8.
Hmm.
And so it'll get there and you don't need to learn how to prompt really well. You just need to be really clear about what you want it to give you back. But the challenge is that for enterprises that are trying to put this in production at scale, is that those extra 4 attempts of thinking it through, that because you didn't know how to specify how it should do it, those will cost so much in the long run at scale because it's doing so much extra work because, to your point, people don't know how to prompt effectively with different models. So yeah.
Cool. It's fun talking with you, man.
Yeah, likewise, man. You've got a great energy. You've got a great energy and a lot of good opinions on this stuff. So I'm very grateful to have met you and to be doing this with you.